London, 1852. A man wakes up in a two-room apartment on Dean Street, Soho. His name is Karl Marx. He's 34 years old. He's been expelled from Germany, from France, and from Belgium, not for violence, for writing. London is the last city that will have him. The British don't arrest writers, they just don't read them. His wife Jenny is already awake. She came from Prussian aristocracy, servants, estates, a family crest. Now she's boiling water on a stove that barely works. Their daughter Francisca is sick. She's 1 year old. She won't live to see two. To understand what Marx is about to do, you need to understand what the world already believed. Europe in the mid-1800s ran on a promise. The Enlightenment had said, reason will set humanity free. Science will replace superstition. Progress will lift everyone. And for some, it had. Factories multiplied output 100-fold. Railroads connected cities in hours instead of days. Medicine was advancing. Literacy was spreading. The philosophers agreed. History was moving forward. The greatest of them, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, had built an entire system to explain it. History, Hegel said, moves through contradictions. Every idea generates its opposite. The clash between them produces something higher. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, progress. And the proof was everywhere. Look at the machines, look at the cities, look at the empire. But Marx had a question Hegel never answered. If history is progress, why were the people making the progress dying at 17? Marx had been a Hegelian. In Berlin, in his 20s, he joined a group called the Young Hegelians, philosophers, students, agitators who sat in beer halls and debated until 2 in the morning. They believed in Hegel's method, but not his conclusions. Hegel said history was driven by ideas, the unfolding of spirit, of reason, of God realizing itself through human civilization. The Young Hegelians pushed back. Ludwig Feuerbach, the most radical of them, argued that God didn't create man, man created God. Religion was a projection, a mirror, humanity worshipping its own image. Marx read Feuerbach and felt the ground shift beneath him. If religion was a human creation, a story people told to make sense of suffering, then what else was? What about law, property, the economy? What if all of it, every structure, every rule, every institution, was not natural, not divine, not inevitable, but built by specific people for specific reasons? And if it was built, it could be unbuilt.
Then he gets a letter from Manchester. Friedrich Engels is the son of a cotton mill owner, the opposite of Marx in almost every visible way. But Engels has seen something that most factory owners' sons never bother to look at. He's been walking through the workers' neighborhoods of Manchester, and he's been writing down what he finds. The two men had met briefly in Paris. They didn't like each other at first, but they kept writing letters, and the letters got longer. And at some point, they realized they were asking the same question from opposite ends of the same city. Engels sends money. He sends data, he sends factory reports, and one day he sends an invitation. Come to Manchester. I'll show you what I see. Marx goes.
Manchester in the 1840s is the engine room of the Industrial Revolution. If London is the showroom, Manchester is the factory floor. The mills are enormous, 5-6 stories of blackened brick. Inside, the noise is so loud that workers communicate with hand signals. Engels takes Marx through the workers' neighborhoods, cellars where families of 6 share a room, no windows, water seeping through the floor, a shared outhouse for an entire street. Then they walk 15 minutes. The streets get wider, the buildings get cleaner, gardens appear behind iron fences. They arrive at Engels's father's house, stone villa, imported wine, a view of the hills. 15 minutes, same city, same economy, same system producing both. Marx is quiet for a long time. Later, he writes something that will stay with him. The economists say the market is rational. I've just walked 15 minutes from a man who can't afford bread to a man who imports champagne. The market is perfectly rational. It is rationally designed to produce exactly this. Marx goes to the British Museum reading room, a circular hall with a domed ceiling and 30,000 books. He takes a seat, G7. He will sit here almost every day for the next 15 years. He's not reading philosophy anymore. He's reading numbers, factory reports, shipping manifests, price indices going back decades. And he finds a question that sounds simple. A worker in a cotton mill produces cloth worth 5 shillings per day. He's paid 1. Where do the other 4 go? He accounts for every cost, and there's always something left over, a gap, in every factory, in every industry, across every decade. He calls it surplus value, the distance between what a worker creates and what he takes home. He doesn't call it theft, not yet. He just measures it. Then he opens a blue book from 1842, a government report on children in mines. Sarah Gooder, age 8, trapper in the Galber pit. I have to trap without a light and I'm scared. I go at 4 and sometimes 3:30 in the morning and come out at 5 and 5:30. I never go to sleep. Sometimes I sing when I've got a light, but not in the dark. I dare not sing then. Marx copies this into his notebook. He doesn't add commentary. He doesn't need to. In 1848, revolution swept across Europe. Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Budapest. Workers and students took to the streets. The old monarchies trembled. Marx was in the middle of it. He'd just published a pamphlet with Engels, 40 pages, written in weeks. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. He went to Cologne, edited a radical newspaper, wrote, organized, agitated, and then the revolutions failed, every single one. The armies came back, the monarchs returned, the barricades were cleared. Marx ended up in London with a question that wouldn't let him go. Why didn't the workers win? They had the numbers, they had the anger, and they still lost. And one day, going through the numbers in seat G7, he finds the answer. If every worker had a job, workers could refuse bad conditions, they could organize, they could say no. But there is always a line outside the factory gate, more people than positions, always. If you complain, you're replaced before your shift ends. If you organize, there are 50 men outside ready to take your place at lower pay. The system needs that line, not because it fails to employ everyone, but because it can't function if everyone is employed. The fear of the line keeps the people inside the factory quiet. This is why the revolutions failed, not because workers lacked courage, because every worker feared for himself more than he could fight for all. The line outside the gate was longer than the barricade. April 1852. Back on Dean Street, things are getting worse. Franziska dies. She was 1 year old. There's no money for a doctor. There's barely money for food. Marx borrows £2 from a neighbor to pay for the coffin. 3 of his children will die before the age of 10. In the same city, at the same time, factory owners' children attend private schools and spend summers in the countryside. Jenny asks him whether the work is worth it, whether the book he's writing matters more than keeping the family alive. He doesn't answer, but every morning he walks to the museum. 15 years in the reading room, seat G7. Engels keeps sending money every month for 20 years. He manages his father's cotton mill in Manchester, reviews numbers, calculates profits, then sends a portion to a man in London who is writing the most thorough critique of that exact arrangement. Marx is not well. His liver is failing. He has boils on his skin that never fully heal. He writes standing up sometimes because sitting is too painful. Jenny copies his manuscripts at night because his handwriting is nearly illegible. London carries on outside. The factories keep running. The workers keep lining up at the gates. September 14th, 1867. Das Kapital, Volume 1. 1,000 pages. 18 years. It's not what people expect, not a manifesto, not a call to revolution. It's a slow, dense anatomy of how the system works, built entirely from the system's own data. British factory reports, British banking records, British census numbers. The first edition sells 1,000 copies. Marx dies in London on March 14, 1883. He's 64. He never finished volumes 2 and 3. Engels will spend 12 years putting them together from notebooks. 11 people attend the funeral at Highgate Cemetery. Within 50 years, half the world will be governed by people who claim to follow the man buried in this grave. Whether they understood what he wrote is a different question entirely. Dean Street, Soho. If you walk down this street today, there's a plaque on the wall of number 28. It says a man named Karl Marx lived here. It doesn't say what he saw from the window.